Friday. So on Wednesday, I think we mentioned the interview that Tucker did with Dave Smith. And Stephanie, I finally got to listen to the whole thing yesterday. And one of the things they talked about was the fact that, since Biden announced his withdrawal from candidacy, whether by force or by choice, which we all know it was forced, but it was basically an admission by the powers that be that he's unfit for office, right? Yet he's still technically the president, and nobody on the left seems to be questioning his ability to remain in office for the rest of the term, or even the fact that Kamala was very clearly complicit in hiding his mental decline from the world. So I want to play this clip from part of the conversation between Tucker and Smith because they were talking about how this massive coup that's taken place should be the Trump campaign's biggest talking point against Kamala.
However, it's amazing to me that Donald Trump, none of his surrogates, no one like on the pro-Trump side seems to be able to effectively hit Kamala Harris with what is the most obvious thing to hit her with. It's the greatest scandal in American history, which is like what you just said, that we don't have a president. The president of the United States, everybody has essentially admitted, is too senile to run for president. Yet he's going to be president until January. We are in a proxy war with the biggest nuclear power in the history of the world. And we have another proxy war-ish type thing that looks to be devolving into a wider regional war in Israel. And we don't have a president. This is like the biggest scandal in the history of the republic, if we're a republic anymore. And Kamala Harris is directly implicated in this. Like, she was one of the major people lying through her teeth that Joe Biden is sharp as a tack in private meetings. And it seems like somehow the Trump campaign has not been able to effectively hit her for this. It's like right there in front of us. You pulling Joe Biden out was admitting that he's too senile to run for president.
Yes.
And yet you're not invoking the 25th Amendment. This is what it's for. He clearly can't be president. And then what does it say about the machine that they're quite happy with that? That works very well for them.
I mean, there are two levels in which it's upsetting. One is the practical level, which is you probably do want a commander-in-chief if you're on the cusp of nuclear war, which we are. But the other is philosophical and speaks to whether our current system can continue. I mean, we're just admitting now that that we don't have an executive, that we don't need an executive. This is governed, that we are governed by an unelected body of people whose names we don't know, whose motives we don't understand. Like, what?
And also, as we
this for the end, right?
And as we all know, the only reason they pulled Joe Biden is because it became clear he couldn't win. But if he could have won, they'd be quite happy to keep him in there. Like, they like that. It's probably better that they don't have this guy who every now and then might think he's president of the United States.
Why is there no curiosity about who they is?
Yeah, well, that's a good question.
I mean, I can't answer that. I mean, I think most people assume Obama is at the top of that pyramid, but I can't confirm that. We don't know. I haven't heard really anybody in a position of authority ask, like, who does run the government?
Yeah, and I don't know that there's I don't know.
Okay, Stephanie, I don't know about you, but this raised so many questions for me. And it got me thinking about how all the conversation about Biden it's literally faded into obscurity ever since he was ousted. I mean, he's all but disappeared from the public eye for the most part. I did read in the New York Post last week, he spent 5 days on vacation at his beach house in Delaware. Nobody heard from him during the time that Iran was threatening to attack Israel. And remember when the Dow fell 1,000 points last week or the week before, whatever that was? We didn't hear from Biden. On Wednesday of this week, the only thing on his public schedule was dropping by a White House economic conference for 15 minutes and then getting his, intelligence briefing at 4 p.m. It is midway through August, and apparently he's only made a couple of public appearances outside of the White House this, entire month. He flew to New Orleans on Tuesday, and then yesterday he went to Maryland with Kamala to promote their new Medicare drug deal fiasco. And yet KJP still gets up on the press pulpit every day, and she holds these press conferences like he's actually doing shit, pretending that we have a functioning government. And it's just like business as usual in the White House. And we are so distracted by the media circus around Trump and Kamala and their VP picks and all the typical shit that goes with a presidential election, right? Except that this election is anything but typical. Like, we have a weaponized media that's in on this biggest coup ever attempted and accomplished in the United States, and they're controlling the narrative. And despite this, like, I still cannot wrap my head around the fact that our country is so far gone that we've allowed an unelected person to just step in and assume the candidacy for the most powerful position literally in the world, right? Like, without a single fucking vote taking place. I don't understand how this completely unconstitutional move is just being accepted and basically ignored by Congress and the American people. And I know I say this in every episode, like adding up the days that go by where Kamala doesn't give a press conference or answer impromptu media questions. But the other concern I have is like, why the fuck is nobody talking about how she's also not giving any important press conferences in her role as the current VP? Why isn't she making any appearances at all in a vice president capacity, except for this Medicare drug deal announcement yesterday? Like, for the last few weeks, where has she been as the vice president? And this drug deal was conveniently like part of her campaign trail. So easy to throw that in there. But I mean, we are at a time when there's so much turmoil and upheaval in the world. And as far as I'm aware, Biden is like checked out or napping 90% of the time. Kamala isn't doing anything at all in Washington as the VP because she's been on her whirlwind campaign tour, deceiving the public with her carefully manipulated new image and basic bitch speeches. So we have a president who's MIA most of the time, except when they decide to like wheel him out here and there for an appearance. We have a vice president who's also MIA in her capacity as a VP and who, let's be real, she was never really in the picture in the first place, except as a DEI placeholder. And when you think about that, the fact that not only do we not have a legitimate president, but we also don't have a legitimate vice president, it just confirms that our government is a sham. Like, it's just a giant show, right? So who the fuck is running the country? And we've speculated about this many times. We know it's not Biden. I don't think it ever was, but at least he was a prop. Like, they pretended he was in charge, but now the establishment isn't even really pretending anymore. I mean, think about this. If they wanted to sell the American public on the sham they created, that the debate was really the deciding factor for deciding, Biden's incompetent and can't run for office, and Kamala really was the best person for the job, why wouldn't they have just forced Biden to resign or invoke the 25th Amendment, made Kamala the president, and actually put her in a position to be doing shit and making changes now? Like, this Friday, Kamala is finally going to be announcing her proposed economic plans at a rally in North Carolina. And from what I've read, according to her campaign, this plan is going to include up to $25,000 in down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. I think for those who have paid rent on time for at least 2 years. Her plans to end the housing crisis will reportedly include building 3 million new homes, offering tax incentives to home builders who prioritize starter homes intended for first-time buyers, and creating a $40 billion innovation fund to encourage local governments to build housing, along with economic assistance for renters and removing tax benefits for Wall Street investors and corporate landlords. And she's also calling for federal control of food and grocery prices in what her campaign described on Wednesday as the, quote, first ever federal ban on price gouging on food and groceries, end quote. And she's doing this by giving the Federal Trade Commission and the state attorney generals the authority to impose harsh penalties that set what they deem to be excessively high prices. Stephanie, what's another word for this?
Communism.
Yeah, exactly. Communism. This is how communist countries deal with inflation. And even if you think that this sounds great, right? Lowering prices, providing housing assistance. Let's get back to what I was saying earlier in this podcast. This is fucking gaslighting the American people. This woman has spent the past 4 years as the vice president of an administration that has quite literally caused all of the inflation that resulted in high grocery prices and unaffordable housing, right? She was the deciding vote that broke the tie to pass the $1.9 trillion Inflation Reduction Act that has quite honestly done the complete opposite and only increased inflation. Grocery prices have risen since 21% since the Biden Harris team took office in January of 2021. And it is because of the Biden Harris admin policies that we're in this fucked up situation in the first place. And like, guess who's paying for this supposed plan to lower the cost of goods and services? Not the greedy corporations that Kamala wants to blame inflation on. It's going to be us, the taxpayers. And if you honestly believe she's suddenly going to change all the policies that she's been supporting and implementing for the past 4 years, I'm sorry, you're either an idiot or you're just not paying attention. Because if she gets elected, not only is the narrative going to be an extension of the current Biden Harris admin policies, but it's going to be a hell of a lot worse. So I want to play a clip from today's Real AF episode because Andy brings up exactly what everybody needs to be asking.
Oh, here.
Yeah, I think it's a hard time. People have a hard time believing that. I think people, like, when you sit someone down, like friends of mine, let's say, who I know are intelligent people who have done things in the world, who don't pay attention to what's going on in the current events, right? And I got a lot of friends like that. You know, we'll sit around, we'll smoke a cigar, we start talking about what's going on. When I start explaining to them like what is actually going on, they look at me like, dude, no way. Right. It's like really hard for them to understand that, like, what we've been warned about for the last 100 years and what communists have been openly saying we're going to take over America without ever firing a shot. That's what they've done. They've done that. And they are in control right now. And we have one chance to potentially, you know, undo that control in this election. But I mean, dude, like I'm just shocked more and more that people, one, don't recognize what's going on, and two, don't call her out for, like, you're in office now. Right. And I actually think that's why she's not doing press, because if we were doing press and you and me were in the crowd, that'd be the first thing I'd ask her. Right. You're up here making all these promises about the first 100 days you're in office. What's stopping you from doing it right now? And she can't answer that. Right. And that's why she's not doing press.
Well, apparently she's also, like, ordered Tim Walz not to do pressers either.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
I saw this meme going around, and it was like the person that's in power is saying that once they get in power, then they'll make a change. And it's like, she's already in power. What has she done over the last 3.5 years? Nothing to help this country. And you know what? I'm sure that $25,000 for first home buyers sounds great. Guess who's going to get that? Probably the 20 million illegal migrants that came into this country. And who's going to pay for it? Because we're $37 trillion in debt. So it's nonsense. And you're absolutely right about the price ceiling for grocery stores being communist. This is literally what the Soviet Union did. And according to economists, every single country that did this historically ended up putting grocery stores out of business, causing scarcity and a food shortage. That's what we're looking forward to in a Kamala presidency. I used to work for Coke and learned in dealing with grocery stores every single day. They have razor thin margins. Their margins are lower than any other industry, meaning they get like 1% to 3% on most grocery items, which equates to like pennies. Okay. And the older millennial on TikTok, he did a deep dive on this. And you know, these supposed greedy grocery corporations. And he found that the number one supplier to grocery stores is Cisco. So he looked up their profit margins, and their profits have actually gone down since Biden took office. And that's on top of this huge hit that they took during COVID as well. So they're not being greedy. Their profits are already, you know, being hurt. And the reason is because the cost of everything has gone up from inflation. It's not that they're just deciding to raise the prices. It's the inflation caused by Biden and Kamala. So all this is going to end up doing is putting grocery stores and food suppliers out of business. What does that do? That strengthens the real greedy corporations like Amazon, who are going to be the only ones that can afford to stay open. And just like during COVID, we saw all the little guys go out of business, and these big corporations like Amazon control the market now. This is going to be more of that. And every economist on both sides, I mean, this is not a political thing. Like anyone with common sense is saying this is going to be detrimental. And I actually forgot, I recorded a clip this morning from the Morning Wire where they have someone talking about this. So let me play that.
The food service industry, particularly grocery stores, they operate on a 1 to 3% profit margin. And somehow she's blaming them for inflation, which is silly. So the idea that she's going to somehow institute some type of price caps, that would be a price control. And if anybody has studied history or economics, you know that a price control leads to rationing. It is something that is done in socialist types of societies. It always has a bad outcome.
Now, if this
So that's what we're getting with this. We're going to be rationing. We're going to have to go and get our rations from the government if she takes over.
Yeah, and I just don't understand why none of the Kamala supporters are looking at the bigger picture and asking these questions. Like, how can you possibly support someone running for office without thinking about or asking why they're not taking over that position now at a critical time when it's been admitted that the current president isn't qualified to lead the country? Lead the country, whatever I said. God, I sound like Biden. But the only logical answer to me is because it doesn't actually matter. Like, we basically have a faceless rogue government. It's like the fucking Wizard of Oz. We have no idea who's actually in control. And that just speaks to the level of power of whoever is actually running the country. Because at this point, I feel like they're not even trying to make it look legit anymore.
No. And like my 15-year-old daughter, the other day, we were driving to school and I had on, one of the podcasts I listened to where they were talking about this, and she brought it up to me. She was like, "Wait a minute. So Biden just like went away. Where did he die?" And I was like, "No, he's still alive." And she's like, "Well, who's the president though right now?" And I'm like, "Biden." And she's like, "Wait, that doesn't make any sense. I thought he's like not able to run because has dementia." And I was like, "Right." And she's like, "So who's running our country?" And I said, "Right. That's the question you should be asking, and no one can answer that." And she was so confused because it's like all you need is a little bit of common sense to ask this question. But of course, the media is never going to do that. They're paid not to, right? So now there's this rumor from the Kamala campaign going around that RFK Jr. supposedly met with Kamala to try to like tell her he'll drop out if she gives him a cabinet position. So here is what he put on social media as a response, and basically highlights the gaslighting from the Democrats and how far they've strayed from their values. So the post reads, VP Harris's Democratic Party would be unrecognizable to my father and uncle, and I cannot reconcile it with my values. The Democrat Party of RFK and JFK was the party of civil liberties and free speech. VP Harris's is the party of censorship, lockdowns, and medical coercion. Kennedy Democrats were anti-war. Kamala's is riddled with neocon warmongers. The RFK JFK Dems were allies of Main Street, cops, firefighters, and working people. VP Harris's is the party of big tech, big pharma, and Wall Street. My dad and uncle's party was the champion of voting rights and fair elections. VP Harris's is the party of lawfare, disenfranchisement, and the coronation of its candidates by corporate donors and party elites. I've used our nation's courts to prosecute corporations who hurt Black Americans. VP Harris used our nation's courts to mercilessly prosecute Black Americans and exploit them for their labor. My father and uncle prided themselves on their skills at debate and their ability to articulate a coherent vision for our country. VP Harris is scared to debate and can't survive an unscripted interview. Instead of outlining a vision, she relies on middle school tactics, memes, forged headlines, infantile slogans like joy, and name calling, such as Republicans are weird. I spent years battling government corruption and lies. VP Harris spent years gaslighting Americans about the health of our commander in chief. I have no plans to endorse Kamala Harris for president. I do have a plan to defeat her. Damn, that's a good comeback. And
It's awesome.
it's spot on. And he's pointing out what we have said for years on this podcast, which is the Democrat Party is no longer the Democrat Party. It's not that like people have changed and become more right or more conservative. It's that they've walked away from any value they have. And the more and more I think about it, I don't think that Kamala Harris voters exist. I think Trump haters exist. And their hatred for Trump is so strong that they don't care. They literally do not care as long as it's not Trump. And getting Trump has been the only thing that the Democrats care about. It has become their core value now. Forget any other value they had. That's out the window. Their number one mission is to get Trump. So, they should see that their party's the real threat to democracy and the party that's pro-war, but they're so brainwashed with hatred and vitriol that they can't see reason anymore. I found this clip on TikTok of this guy that's outside of one of Kamala's events, and he's going around asking people what her best policy is. And this is freaking hilarious. Listen to their responses.
We're trying to find out from the attendees what Kamala Harris's greatest accomplishment has been as VP.
I mean, honestly, I'm not too into politics. I'm just here for the vibe. Becoming the first female vice president.
So becoming the VP is the best accomplishment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Being a good person. Being a good person?
Yeah. She's, I mean, she's, I don't know. She seems really good for women.
Harris is there with the energy. She has a lot of enthusiasm, so it's important to get behind her. What is Kamala's top accomplishment, you think?
Because right now, it's okay.
Her top contributions to policy or policy as VP.
I wasn't in on the policy making decisions with President Biden, so I don't know.
Favorite policies? Oh my gosh! See, I wish they would tell us more about that because I honestly don't know. I know she's done some good work with immigration, even though they say opposite.
What do they say?
Well, what is it? She's the border czar.
She's the fake border czar.
All these immigrants are coming over, across the border, which I don't think they are.
People have been saying that Kamala's a border czar, or whatever that means. Is there an issue at the border? Has Kamala done anything about it? Or was there not anything to do about it, so they're just kind of making things up?
So I don't think there's an issue with the border at all. Yeah, I feel like, yes, illegal immigrants are coming to America, but that's what America's all about, is to come to America and live that American dream, because America isn't just for the whites. It's not just for the blacks. It's not just for the Mexicans. No, it's for everyone around the world. We're supposed to be a country letting people come in and do what they like. I mean, I understand that they say the border crisis is causing all these drug issues and is causing crime, but in my opinion, there's crime everywhere. You can go to New York, you can go to Canada, you can go anywhere across the world, and there's going to be crime regardless.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Every other country's crime is down because they're sending their criminals here. They couldn't
Stephanie,
name one fucking policy, Tara.
that made my brain hurt.
I know.
That was painful.
I
Oh my
know.
God.
It's so ridiculous. Not one policy, not one accomplishment, because she hasn't had any. Like I said before, I can't critique her because she hasn't done anything. It's all about vibes. Well, if cringy is your vibe, then Kamala is your girl. But here's the thing. Were any of those people even real Kamala supporters? Maybe they couldn't answer any questions because they're paid actors. Because all over TikTok, people are posting screenshots of casting calls for Kamala and for the DNC. Let me read one of them. So this one says, it's a casting call where they want people from the south of the USA, real Democratic supporters. So singles, groups, or families, you're being cast as a real person who supports the Democratic Party. Listen, you're being cast as a real person. So pretend you're a real Democrat, okay? Please spread the word. This video is about freedom, how it shows up and how we dream, how we hope, how we live into the lives we want as Americans. Well, additional rate details. So not only do you get paid for this, but we also pay for flight and expenses per diem for meals and transportation. And then it gives the date, the time. The date for this is for the DNC. They're fucking paying people to show up to these events.
Paying them,
Actors.
paying for their travel, paying for their food, for people to come and pretend to be real people.
Yep. And all over TikTok that you have these. You have there's another one where you get $1,500 for one post on TikTok where you basically just talk about Kamala, but you have to use their talking points. And you're not allowed to say anything positive about Trump, only Kamala. Like they are literally paying actors to do this. So you have Trump that can fill up stadiums in any city in America on a moment's notice, but the DNC has to pay people transportation, room and board, meals to get them to show up and act as though they're Democrats. And like, it's just absolutely insane. So Kamala is a fake candidate. She's a fake candidate that is controlled by the establishment elites. She doesn't stand for anything. Everything radical that she supposedly stood for in the past, she's completely turned away from now. And now she's literally copying Trump with like the no taxes on tips. And now all of a sudden there's this like tough on the border talk, but there's no substance behind it. There's no record to back any of it up. And I mean, it's like truly bizarre, but the media is never going to question it. But here's the thing, like, does it even matter? Does it even matter what the media says? Because one of the things that Dave Smith and Tucker talked about was the fact that technology has totally changed the landscape and how you're actually better off without the media. And Tucker is a perfect example of that. He was the #1 cable news show and he was fired. And he is doing better now and getting more numbers of people now tuning in than when he was the top rated show on cable news. Like that says it all. People are not tuning in to the MSM anymore. They're tuning in to live streams, podcasts, and social media. And it's like sometimes I get so worked up over these joker news anchors, but I shouldn't because it doesn't matter. Like they've lost their power. And there may be some, some people still tuning in, but we've got 1 billion people tuning in to Elon Musk and Trump's live stream. We have Tucker Carlson as the #1 podcast. That's what people really are listening to. It's not the mainstream news anymore.
Well, I guess it's going to depend on how much the Kamala campaign pays people for continuing to post on social media. And like, I ask this every time, how is any of this even fucking legal? Like, it makes no sense to me. And I guess we'll see. But the next question that I have, Stephanie, where's Congress, right? Where's Congress in all of this? Because technically, Mike Johnson is next in line for the presidency, right? If Biden's not around and Kamala's not around, isn't he the responsible one? Like, why aren't Republicans in Congress actually using this coup as a catalyst to take action and do something? And I was reading this op-ed in the Washington Times by Brandon Whiteshirt. He's a national security analyst, and I want to read part of what he wrote. He said, quote, Mr. Johnson is nowhere to be found. In fact, almost no Republican in a leadership position in Washington appears interested in lighting up the nation's capital during the election. America's elected leaders, notably the Republicans in the House, should be making much greater noise against the apparent caretaker president who is doing anything but minding the store. The world teeters on the brink of a world war. The economy may or may not be crashing soon. and Americans are at each other's throats in ways not seen in decades. A president is desperately needed right now. Just who is advising Mr. Johnson and the rest of the prominent Republican leadership to essentially lay low, and why? There may never be another opportunity to exercise power despite being in the minority than now. Mr. Johnson and his fellow Republican leaders should be kicking down the doors of every news program, reminding audiences that we have no president and our vice president is persona non grata. The House Republicans should immediately begin pushing legislation on some of the most important issues for the GOP. Who cares if it goes nowhere? The House GOP can at least help the Trump campaign by demonstrating to the American people that they're interested and capable of governing, end quote. And then he goes into like specifics about legislation and says like the bottom line is that GOP leadership isn't doing shit to fight for what's right, which frankly, not a surprise, right? I mean, how many times have we talked on this podcast about how useless our clown show Congress is? But I, again, just cannot wrap my head around the fact that the largest coup in American history is taking place right before our eyes. And the only one trying to stop it is Trump. And like, to me, this just confirms that the rest of them, they're all just part of the uniparty and they're all in on this plan to destroy the country.
Yeah. I mean, I agree because, I mean, what have they ever done? What have they ever done? There have been investigation after investigation, hearing after hearing, not one single person held accountable. And other than like Matt Gaetz and Luna and maybe like 5 others, the rest are the establishment, uniparty. They're collecting money from lobbyists. They only care about their political career and pocketbook. And even if they were to do something, the Senate is a Democrat majority and they're going to stop it, you know? So it's just like one big theater performance. I'm telling you, it's all fucking fake. And during that Tucker interview, Dave Smith said something that I think everyone needs to hear and recognize, which is he said, quote, "Government isn't the business world. It's the criminal organization world." Now, he was talking about this in the context of Trump and why Trump didn't drain the swamp the first time to the degree that he should have. And Dave Smith was saying, you know, he went into it thinking he'll treat it like a business and just fire everyone. And that's when the agencies like the FBI and CIA that are really in control went after him like the mob would. And he said, you know, just think about it. The last person that tried to fire the CIA was JFK, and he was assassinated right after. It's a fucking criminal organization. That's who really runs this country. And that's why Congress doesn't do shit. It's a theater performance. Like they want to make it appear that the people have some level of control over their government, when the reality is these rogue agencies are really controlling everything. That's how they get away with misplacing $3 trillion. So I want to go conspiracy mode for just 1 minute because it's all making sense in my mind, at least. So I was listening to Dr. Stephen Greer, who, by the way, I don't entirely trust this guy. I think there's something shady. He shouldn't be alive. If everything that he says is true, they would have taken him out. So I kind of feel like he's paid opposition or whatever. But anyhow, he has legitimately worked on many Black Ops projects. He's very involved behind the scenes with all the UAP stuff. He's worked with a lot of different congressmen, like plenty of people vouch for the guy. So I know he has some level of legitimacy. So he went on the Sean Ryan show. And Sean Ryan asked him who's really in charge of our government, who has the most power. And I want to play a clip. It's a little bit long, so just stick with it because it's very telling what he says. If I can find the clip. Here we go.
How do I take on a group that have technologies that can do circles around the best thing I know we have, a B-2 stealth? He says, that's the best thing I know to deploy. And I have found out, and I have now convinced there is a secret organization that have technologies that can literally do circles around my B-2. And I said, yes. And he just said, it's point set match. He says, I don't even know how to take that on. And that is how that meeting ended. And it was very grave. And I went, well, you know, there's a difference. Those projects are being run outside the law. And I said, the law is only what you, power is only what you use. If you don't use law and if you don't use power, then you let sociopaths and criminals run amok. And unfortunately, that's what's happened since the late 1950s. I later found it was on Eisenhower's watch. Unfortunately, he was old, he was tired, he was a four-star general, World War II, that this group of the secret government group sort of seized control over these operations. So in reality, the constitutional government of the United States has not been in a proper oversight and control of these operations since the late 1950s.
Okay, so the man he was referring to was Admiral Wilson, who Greer reached out to him and said, hey, these agencies have gone rogue. We need to get them under control. And according to him, and then that was a conversation, but according to him, we haven't had control since Eisenhower. And it's like this rogue underground, whatever, government / military / criminal organization that's really running the show. And just think about that for a moment. Okay. Who was elected after Eisenhower? It was JFK, who was assassinated the moment he called it out and said the CIA went rogue and needs to be shut down. They fucking killed him. So he's killed. Lyndon B. Johnson takes over. And then after that, Nixon. What happened to Nixon? He ends up resigning due to Watergate, which now all this stuff is coming out where it looks like he was totally set up. So it would make sense if that is when some secret group behind the scenes began truly controlling things and took out the presidents that first tried to stand up for them. It would explain how on multiple occasions we've lost trillions of dollars. It would explain where those, dollars went. Now, later in that podcast, Greer was asked about who the most powerful person is in that group. And he just kind of chuckled and he was like, you would have never even heard of him. I'm not even going to say because you've never heard of him. These people are in the shadows and you would never know it. You wouldn't recognize their face. You wouldn't recognize their name. So we always say it's Obama, but the likely answer is it's people that are in the shadows that we don't even know who they are. And so that's basically a long-winded way of explaining why Congress doesn't do shit and why we have a puppet, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And that's why the whole world seems to be going to such great lengths to make sure Trump doesn't get back in, because I truly believe that he was the one person since JFK, possibly Nixon, that stood up to this group. And if I had to bet money on it, I would bet that's why he formed Space Force. He created his own government agency within our government, I think, so that he'd have a group with its own funding that could stand up to these other agencies that have gone rogue. So conspiracy mode, yet totally when you look at all the shit that's happened, it's come on, there's someone other than Joe Biden controlling things right now. We all can kind of agree on that. And according to Greer, it's a whole organization that's pretty well funded. So I don't know, Tara, have I gone crazy?
No, I say frequently, if you told me these things 2 years ago, I would just laugh. But now it's all plausible.
Yeah, it's just fucking nuts. It's there's no telling, but I think I do stand by what I say. I think Congress is nothing but a theater performance. I really do. Otherwise, a lot more would have been done to keep our country right now. Look at how much has been destroyed in under 4 years. But back to the Tucker and Dave Smith interview, Dave brought up Israel and how most Americans don't want war. They've done polling on this. Nobody wants to go to war. Nobody wants American boots on the ground over there. And he's saying that he thinks it's hurting Trump to take this pro-Israel stance. And I have to say, I agree. I think Trump's strategy is it's got to be to try and get the Jewish Democrats to vote for him, because most Jewish people in the United States are Democrat. I think they did a poll that said over 70% are Democrat. But my whole thing is there really doesn't appear to be many Jewish people standing up for Trump. When was the last time, other than maybe Ben Shapiro, you don't really see people going to bat for him. So I don't know that it's actually going to help him there. But one of the big things that helped Trump, that Dave Smith brought this up, that helped him win the election before, was that he was going to get us out of this 20-year war in the Middle East. And that resonated with people. People wanted that. And this time around, he just keeps saying how, oh, it never would have happened if I was president. And I mean, he's right. It wouldn't have happened. But I think he needs to shift from talking about the past and focus on the future and really make it clear that he will get us out of these wars, including the war in Israel. Because right now it is a bit unclear with Israel, like what he intends to do. And it's super unclear where Kamala stands. I mean, on any issue, but especially, on this issue. And so I think Trump could really use that to his advantage by taking the same exact approach that he did in 2016 that got him elected, which is I am going to get us out of these wars, out of NATO, and focus on America first. And I think Elon Musk brought this up during that live stream with Trump, where Israel has a ton of money, a strong military, and an Iron Dome. And like, we don't have that here. We don't have an Iron Dome in America. But yet we're like sending money over there. And Trump did say, he was like, it only takes one maniac to start something, so that he is going to build an Iron Dome here. That's what he says. So that's the first I've heard of that. But like, that's the kind of stuff that he should be shouting from the rooftops. What are we going to do here in America? And like, give us your confirmation that you're going to get us the fuck out of these wars, because nobody wants to go to war. And let's stop sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, to NATO, and even to Israel, and let's build up our own country. That's where I think he needs to get back on track with the message that won him the election in 2016.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that, because just consistently talking about what wouldn't have happened if he was president, that's not doing shit to help the American people right now. So, yeah, focus on the shit that people want to hear that will actually make a difference. Okay, I know we've just been talking forever, but before we go, speaking of Trump, I have to bring up an article that I read this morning in the Daily Mail. And Stephanie, tell me if you've seen anything about this on social media, because we really haven't heard a whole lot about the investigation into the attempted assassination of Trump lately, right? Like, after Secret Service Chief Kimberly Cheadle resigned over 3 years ago, all the attention has just been on the presidential race. But last night, Representative Clay Higgins from Louisiana released a report on his website claiming that the FBI is doing a, quote, scorched earth investigation into this assassination attempt. So apparently, Higgins is on the bipartisan task force reviewing the assassination attempt. And on August 5th, he went and tried to view the body of the shooter, Thomas Crooks, but he couldn't because the FBI released the body for cremation 10 days after the shooting. The biggest issue with this is that nobody involved in the congressional investigation, which I guess is being conducted by two different committees, the Homeland Security Committee and the Oversight Committee, none of them knew that the body had even been returned to the family, nor did the county coroner or local law enforcement. So in this report, Higgins stated that the coroner still has legal authority over the body, and the FBI went and made this decision, and that this is basically an act of obstruction to their investigative efforts.
I think that's very telling that the FBI was involved, just like we know now that they were involved in January 6th. And, their fingerprints have been on pretty much everything so far to take down Trump. And that's there you go. It was the FBI. I mean, that's all there is to it, like clear as day. And it's like, when you're saying this and just everything we talked about in this episode, there's so much corruption with the coup of Biden to the Trump assassination attempt to everything else. It's like you're trying to juggle all these different things and no one's really calling it out. I think what Trump needs to do, now that he's got Elon Musk on his side and they saw how powerful that live stream was, do a fucking live stream every day, at least every week, and call this stuff out. Stop talking about like the same old shit. Call it out, because people are listening and this is the kind of thing that they need to hear. And it doesn't matter if the mainstream media says it's misinformation. It doesn't matter. They don't need the mainstream media to get behind them. Like, that's what they need to focus on.
Yeah,
Oh,
I agree.
speaking of the Secret Service, I'll leave you with, it's kind of a funny story, but it just goes to show like how ridiculous the Secret Service is right now. So recently, at a very recent event, I forget which one of Trump's like rallies, the head of the Secret Service for that particular event was like doing a sweep of the grounds, like last minute, where you just go and make sure everyone's in place. And in a room that is reserved for people like Trump, he finds a female Secret Service agent and her family sitting there while she's breastfeeding, which you're not supposed to do. I mean, we're talking about like protecting the life of the presidential nominee, and she's breastfeeding in like a designated area for like Trump. And it's just like, oh my, you can't make this shit up. It's so
Yeah.
ridiculous. I mean, I'm all for like working moms, whatever, but that's not the time nor the place. Like, you shouldn't have a job like that if you need to be breastfeeding. Like, I'm sorry. I'm a woman, I'm a mom, I have nursed my kids. I would not be putting myself in that situation. Like, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, that shouldn't be her assignment. She should be in an office somewhere where she
Yes.
can go into don't they have all those, like, what do they call them? Lactation rooms in all
Yeah.
the government buildings now where she could be taking care of business.
Well, and the thing was, she wasn't authorized to do that. Like, it's not like she asked, hey, I need to do this. And they were like, yeah, go ahead. Like, no, absolutely not. So, like, clearly they need to clean house with the Secret Service because this shit is crazy. Well, at least that's a laugh at the end of this episode because it's getting
Yeah.
crazy. But we'll keep you guys posted. Have a great weekend, and thanks for tuning in.